welcome to this episode of Live with Lizzie Lee, powered by the China Project. Today, joining me is Maurice Rudolph, a research scholar at Yale Law School. Maurice, let's delve right into the Wagner coup or the Wagner mutiny. Quite a whirlwind of events in the past 24 hours. How do you anticipate those events to be perceived in Beijing, and what is media coverage like in Chinese so far?
Well, for China, stability and predictable relations with Russia are the most important part. And so the revolt or the mutiny or the attempted coup was definitely perceived with deep concerns. And now, of course, there's still a lot of uncertainties. This issue is still evolving. But one can say that Putin may appear weaker at this point, and this will also worry Beijing, of course. But when it comes to the Chinese media, so at the beginning of when this was taking place, there was only from more distant reports repeating the official Russian line vis-a-vis Prigozhin, but not focusing on the details of them moving up towards Moscow. But now there have been more detailed reports focusing on the events in more detail and about the negotiation from Lukashenko and so on. So now there's more an official media also reporting on this issue. There's no direct criticism of Putin in the official media outlets, which is not too surprising. But the whole situation shows that this is of deep concern in China for the leadership, and it is of big interest. And this was quite obvious when you look at Chinese social media, where the whole event was discussed quite vividly.
Right, quite a curveball thrown into China's relationship with Russia. I also wanted to turn to the Chinese Prime Minister Li Qiang's European trip a little bit. This is Li Qiang's inaugural foreign trip to Europe as a PM. What were Li Qiang's primary goals, and what impression did Li Qiang leave behind in European capitals?
Well, I think the main goal for the Chinese side was to refocus on the positive side of the economic relations with China. This was the main goal. And in addition to that, it was aimed to show China as a responsible global power at the international level. For instance, when it comes to offering itself as a partner on the fight against climate change, but also playing a responsible role in questions of debt relief for developing countries. My impression was that you see more trust between the European-Chinese relations vis-a-vis the US-China relations. This was quite obvious how Li Qiang was hosted, and the language and the whole event by itself just underlined this. But it also showed that Europe as a whole is still in the search for a common position on how to reposition its relations vis-a-vis China. And you see this, that it's of course really complex, but it was quite obvious when you saw that Li Qiang was going to Berlin, but then he also went to Munich, and where he met someone from the opposition party, who is the minister president of Bavaria, and there he was hosted in a really in a big room, and this was just a purely economic focus, while other European countries would not have done it like this because they have different economic interests and relations there. So it really underlined that to understand in which direction Europe is going as a whole, all those domestic factors and domestic developments are key to understanding where Europe is heading, in addition to the geopolitical direction, of course. But this is also key, and the visit of Li Qiang just underlined this even more.
Right. So we know, China's attitude toward foreign businesses has soured a little bit over the past few years, at least, that's what's reported in the media. How do European countries, European firms these days view China's attitudes toward foreign business? Is China still perceived as open for business, or has something changed?
Well, the key questions of not having a level playing field, of having problems with market access, those are still one of the key obstacles between Europe and China, and they have been reiterated all over again. But now the environment has become even more challenging in recent years. Just an example, like the recently passed cybersecurity law that causes a lot of European businesses to think, like, how does this impact their ability to work in China and to do this in a meaningful, sustainable way. But having said that, like, China is still a vital market, for instance, for German car manufacturers. And so you see that the field of cooperation is still there, but it is becoming narrower in some extent. So like it's more of a security focus now there as well. This is a component that wasn't that central a couple of years ago, but now it's becoming more and more of an issue. So you have like issues like climate tech cooperation, for instance, where there's like still an area and a willingness to improve the relationship. But in times of like when like de-risking is on the agenda, there is this point that like you cannot do this instantly. So this will take time. And when you're dealing with like all those economic challenges, you still have to take into consideration that you need to find alternatives for the Chinese market. And you can't just like wish them to appear. This is a long-term process, but we're at the beginning, or we're already in this process as we speak.
Fantastic. Another word that has been kind of in the media a lot recently is this idea of de-risk. How do European countries position themselves amid this tech rivalry between the United States and China? Is there an inclination for European countries to actually de-risk from China?
Well, yes, there is an inclination to de-risk from China and in this area, but there is like no common detailed definition of what that means and how this would be implemented. So on some areas where I think everybody is on the same page among the G7 and in Europe is that when it comes like to tech that strengthens Chinese military and the ability of Chinese intelligence services capabilities, that this is a red line. This is like one area of risk that they don't want to, they are aware of. And this has an impact on their relationship with China, and they do want to de-risk. But the question is like, what entails national security interests? And in the United States, there appears to be a much broader definition of this than among European countries. And like finding a common European position on this, like this will be really challenging. And in the end, it will be like a difficult technical debate where the interests might be different from, and the interest groups might be different and differently capable to influence the political debate, depending if you're in Germany, for instance, or whether you are in Ireland or in Lithuania. It's just, it will be really difficult, a technical process to make de-risking from a word into concrete, coordinated action.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the insight. I also wanted to turn back to China and Russia a little bit. Can China effectively contribute to peace negotiations between Russia and Ukraine? What is the perception in Europe?
Well, I think first we need to see whether Putin will choose to further escalate after the coup attempt vis-a-vis Ukraine, or like what are like the concrete impact of this coup attempt to his approach towards China, approach towards Ukraine. And this is still uncertain, and this will play a significant role also on whether like what China can do and what China wants to do. But what we saw today was like that the Russian deputy foreign minister met with Qin Gang in Beijing, and so there's close contact. There's like there's discussions going forward there, and but like for China's concrete role, so there's I think we need to differentiate between like the concrete areas, like for instance, where China can play a role, like for instance on food security, fostering the Black Sea Grain Initiative, also on issues relating to humanitarian relief in Ukraine, and on nuclear security. But on nuclear security, like there's an abstract, like the Chinese side has said they don't want any threats to be made on this issue. But like concretely, there has been no condemnation of like stationing Russian nuclear warheads in Belarus. So for the Chinese side, like if they want to signal something to Europe, this is like one of the areas they could signal. And in addition, like Li Hui did his trip through Europe. And but now there needs to be a follow-up, like for the Chinese, for instance, to update their 12-point proposal that is like really abstract, but like whether the Chinese, if they want to play a constructive role, they would need to take what they heard during this trip into consideration and now move this forward, either with like new talks, new rounds, or with a more concrete proposal that reflects what Li Hui heard when he was traveling through Europe.
Very helpful. Final question of the day. Were there any tangible outcomes or achievements resulting from Li Qiang's visit? Should there be deliverables that we expect to see in the media in the next few days or weeks?
Well, in Berlin, there were 10 agreements that were signed. For instance, the Climate Transformation Dialogue was now set up. There is on a ministerial level on environmental cooperation, there was an agreement reached. And the NDRC signed cooperation agreements with Siemens, BMW, and Mercedes-Benz, including on and hydro mobility. Like those are like the German economic heavyweights. Also, the Chinese Ministry of Education signed a cooperation agreement with VW on skilled labor. So you see, like the big European, the big German economic giants, they signed some agreements, but also on the global issues, mostly on like fighting climate change, there were concrete results. Then in Paris, like China agreed on well, becoming more involved, like on some debt relief vis-a-vis Zambia, that is the main creditor there, and it was anticipated for China to play a stronger role there, and they moved into this direction with like a significant debt relief there. But I think that like the fundamental obstacles that have led to a deterioration of the relationship, or making it more complex, they are still there, and they are very unlikely to be resolved in the near future. And you have those geopolitical dynamics that always can derail the relationship between Europe and China. And this is, of course, like the geopolitical tensions over Taiwan, for instance, but also the upcoming US elections and the dynamics that produces within the United States. So for Europe, they're in a really tough spot right now, and they're trying to balance the economic cooperation and the cooperation on the global issues with China with the tougher security environment, which they also take into consideration. So it's a really tough spot Europe is in right now.